The man who's brought us Midnight Mass, Oculus, The Haunting of Hill House, Hush, and so many others is back for one final project with Netflix. Mike Flanagan once again brings horror stories to life with The Fall of the House of Usher. It's a limited series, so should you be binging, or will it have you saying nevermore? Ruthless siblings Roderick and Madeline Usher have built Fortunato Pharmaceuticals into an empire of wealth, privilege, and power. But past secrets come to light when the heirs to the Usher dynasty start dying at the hands of a mysterious woman from their youth. So, this is a who's who of Flanagan actors. I mean, so many of the ones that he's worked with on past projects, they show up in House of Usher. Some in larger roles, others in small cameo type ways. There's Kate Siegel, Carla Gugino, Henry Thomas, Zach Gilford, Samantha Sloyan, Bruce Greenwood, and Rahul Kouli, and they're among the regulars. But then there are even more. And then he's brought some familiar faces that haven't really collaborated with him in the past, like Mark Hamill or Mary McDonnell. So to say the cast is stacked is a huge understatement. Now I'll get to some of the stand-up performances in just a bit, but first I wanted to discuss the story some, without spoilers. So if you're an Edgar Allan Poe purist, this series will probably be disappointing because while the title is The Fall of the House of Usher, each episode takes more of its inspiration from individual Poe stories, like Mask of the Red Death, Telltale Heart, or The Pit and the Pendulum. Now Flanagan does a phenomenal job at mixing these stories into a larger narrative that is cohesive and engaging. The format for the storytelling is basically all through flashbacks, as Roderick Usher, played by Bruce Greenwood, recounts tragedies of the past several days while also drawing in information and development from far in the past. Now, the narrative is pretty captivating, but there are some spots where the repetitive type of storytelling, it becomes a little stale. And this doesn't happen in an overwhelmingly large amount, but it is there. The individual stories each have a differing level of creepiness to them. Slow and mounting dread is built through each episode, and it typically gives us a messed up reward. And because this is Poe and horror, we are presented with some gloriously bloody and violent sequences that end with brutal death. And while some of the deaths are standard, a few are grossly creative. And thankfully, the series also doesn't shy away from the gruesome imagery, with some scenes creating very visceral reactions due to the unflinching camera. Now, something that I really appreciate about Mike Flanagan is his use of very subtle and scary imagery. In Haunting of Hill House, there are multiple times where there's no jump scare or big violence. Instead, he chooses to use something hiding in the background to instill massive unease. And Flanagan once again employs these tactics where if you're not looking, you miss it. In the shadows, there's just going to be something that's utterly hidden until it moves. And these are typically brief, but still wildly effective in producing chills. The limited series, it's quite the binge with 8 episodes that are all at or maybe even above an hour in length. Now, I was afraid at parts that some of the story would feel either rushed or dragged out by the end because each episode typically focuses on one character while also building out the larger narrative. But there are more episodes than key characters. This wasn't a problem. I was hooked all the way through, and despite some of the repetitious storytelling devices, the horrific mystery as a whole, it was captivating. Now, for the characters, each is wonderful, but a few are way more prominent within the series. Bruce Greenwood and Carl Lumbly are probably featured the most, followed then by Mary McDonnell and Carla Gugino. Now, the whole tone of the series is angry and dark, but it's then mixed with hopeless futility. I'm not even saying that as a negative. The tone is what is so engaging about this. We watch people of varying levels of vileness experience challenges that range from mild difficulties to horrifying brutality. With the cast being as large as it is, we typically don't spend a lot of time with any of them that aren't being featured for an individual episode. They're present throughout other episodes, but if you have a favorite actor outside of the 4 that I had mentioned just a second ago, you won't see them prominently displayed throughout the entire show. Now, this again isn't a bad thing, just more of something to be aware of. And for me, some of the standouts were Henry Thomas, Kylie Curran, and Surian Sepkoda. Now, they each have storylines that, while they're mainly flawed, they are also emotionally demanding roles, requiring more emotional range than some of the other characters. And just because they display a larger range of emotions, that doesn't mean that they're good people or sympathetic characters, just that they're more dynamic and they stood out to me, while many of the other players are designed to be more one-dimensional. And as far as development goes, a couple of the characters don't get sufficient build-up, making them feel more distant. We can still form an opinion about them based on actions, but the inner workings are sparse, making them evil but shallow. Samantha Sloyan's character of Tamerlane Usher is a good example of this. She's driven and motivated, but also devoid of personal connection. And then there's not a good understanding of what makes her tick. I mean, really, that's a shame because I absolutely loved to hate her in Midnight Mass. Now, here, she could still elicit strong reactions, but without the backing of character insight. Rahul Kouli is another example of the thin development. And while I loved his performance, he's a big stranger to us as well. We get the sense of who he is in the moment, but how his past influences his present, that's unknown. And something that I found humorous with Cooley is that he starred in iZombie with Malcolm Goodwin, who also has some appearances in this series. Now, they're not on screen together, but secretly, I kept hoping that Rose McIver would also make a small appearance, just to complete the undead trifecta. Now, there's a lot to like in the series, especially if you enjoy subtle, creepy imagery that's augmented by horrific violence. The cast is wonderful, using their experience with Flanagan to execute his vision with ease. But the character development is lacking with some, losing connection and lessening some of the trauma endured by the characters because their pasts are unknown. The visuals are spectacular, instilling dread and chills thanks to both overtly gory violence and cleverly insidious figures hiding in the dark. The mystery contained within the overall narrative is engaging and intriguing, shrewdly unfolding the tale a bit at a time. And while the limited series is a longer one, the binge is certainly worth it, creatively using multiple Poe stories to craft a palpable and solid horror. There's sex, nudity, almost non-stop profanity, and a boatload of gruesome violence. I give The Fall of the House of Usher 4 out of 5 couches. So do you like Poe stories? Do you have maybe a favorite? Let me know what it is in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.